Hello and welcome to the University of Northern Colorado Distance DI training video. This video was recorded in 2024 and is intended for the UNCO Dietetic Internship Preceptors of the 2024-25 academic year. If you are viewing this beyond 2025, please be sure to touch base with the UNC faculty and staff to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information. My name is Brianna Williams, and I am the Program Coordination Specialist for the UNC DI and MSDI. I'm also a dietitian, a certified nutrition support clinician, and a former clinical preceptor. It is my pleasure to be guiding you through this process today. I have no conflicts or funding to disclose. On behalf of the UNC DI and MSDI programs, thank you for your commitment to precepting and for your commitment to being here today. After this training, preceptors will be able to identify their responsibilities throughout the rotation, which includes documentation of their scores for competencies and learning activities, signing off on rotation hours, and providing scores for the progress reports. Your responsibilities prior to the intern's first day include the following. Review the material sent, including the list of competencies and learning activities. We ask our preceptors to facilitate the completion of these competencies, so it's a good idea to review them before the rotation. We do recognize that these are hefty emails, sometimes containing several documents. We try to limit how much information we throw at you, but there is a lot that goes into the execution of a successful internship, and it is our job to make sure we support you in this. So we ask that you create a tentative plan or even a schedule to determine which competencies the intern should plan to complete with you. Communication is key from prior to the rotation through the end and even afterward. We want to make absolutely sure that you have what your facility requires and that the intern has what they need prior to the first day. In order to achieve this, we like to confirm that there are any onboarding requirements specific to your facility, such as background check beyond the one that they have already completed for our program, or a basic life support certification and access to EMR training. These are just a few examples. We also ask that you communicate with the intern what they should know prior to their first day, such as the best way to communicate with you via email, text, phone call, attire recommendations. That could be, are they required to purchase slip-safe shoes or a lab coat? Or should they expect to receive a set of scrubs? Should they wear jeans, or is this more of a business casual? Are there shoes that they require? Whatever that may be, we ask that you communicate with them so that they're prepared and that they show up ready to rotate. Also, if there are any specific instructions when it comes to parking, entering the facility, should they expect to have an ID to present at the front desk? Should they expect to meet you in a lobby or at your office? And then in terms of accessibility, if there are specific locations of where they can find ramps, elevators, versus just a staircase if they need that. If there are ASL interpreters available, or how to schedule an interpreter for the rotation. If there are lactation rooms designated for employees, and if an intern has access to that. And also just general, will they have a refrigerator to store their lunch, or will you be providing lunch in your cafeteria, whatever the case may be. You're welcome to list these accommodations out that I just mentioned. You can also ask the intern if there's anything that they should be aware of in terms of accommodations that they might need. And we have heard from interns that this is greatly appreciated, so interns can feel comfortable and prepared. So hopefully by day one, you have reviewed the list of competencies and learning activities for the internship, and you have a general idea of which you plan to complete. What you probably have not done yet is reviewed the intern's master copy of that final rotation CRDN eval. This is the running list of which competencies the intern has completed already. You may choose to review this and focus on the competencies that have not yet been completed, but you're also more than welcome to complete and repeat competencies the intern has already done. We expect that they'll do each competency more than once in more than one rotation. Day one is also a good time for you to inform your intern which learning activities you would be willing to review and score. As I'll show you later, we have a long list of learning activities that they are required to complete at some point during their internship. This does not necessarily mean that you have to complete these all. In fact, we absolutely do not expect or even recommend that one preceptor complete every learning activity. Our hope is that you'll review the activities, you'll determine which you feel comfortable with or which could be executed at your facility, and you'll let your intern know of that on day one, or even before the start of the rotation if you would like. We also ask that you give them a due date for this. Some preceptors would like everything handed in maybe the last day of the rotation. But especially if you have a longer rotation or you're planning to score several of these, we expect that it'll take you maybe longer than just the very end of the rotation. So if you would like, you can space these out. Tell your intern, this one will be due next week, then the following week, every Friday or every Monday. Or if it's one of those longer ones, you could say, why don't you send me a rough draft next week? We can talk about it, make sure you're on the right direction before you move forward and complete the entire thing. Also, some of those learning activities, they require components to be done in the rotation. So these learning activities are largely done outside of the rotation hours at home. When they're doing research, they're writing, they're creating these assignments. But a lot of them do require some work to be done during the rotation, be it a presentation they plan to deliver or a recipe that they're modifying, which they could do at home on their own. But if it's a recipe that you would like for them to use your kitchen equipment and supplies to create, then of course they would need to do that while they're on site in your kitchen. The other thing I'll mention with this component is that it's a good idea to let your intern know how you prefer these to be delivered. We always prefer electronic copies, whether it's a Word doc, a PDF, a PowerPoint presentation, or a handout made in Canva or Adobe Express, because that way we can have a copy of them on record as well, and we can view what work the interns are doing. Now, with that said, we recognize that some of these activities might really not be done digitally, and they're kind of all done on site in person. It's a conversation that you're having or a presentation that they're delivering to a group of children or whatever the case may be. But typically we'll expect to see some sort of digital copy or a record of what has been completed, even if it's just as simple as a brief summary of what the activity was and how they executed it. We have also received feedback that interns greatly appreciate an understanding of what your expectations are. For example, if you're a clinical preceptor, when do you expect interns to start seeing patients independently? How many patient assessments should they be performing each day during their first week, during their second week, during their sixth week? How long should interns plan to spend reviewing charts? How long will they generally spend in a patient room? How long should it take them to write a chart note? We, of course, recognize that these time estimates vary from patient to patient, from intern to intern, and also from week to week as the intern progresses and improves their efficiency. But this can help interns know if they are on track to perform staff relief in the coming weeks, or if they should focus their efforts on a particular area, whether that be improving efficiency in their chart notes or whatever the case may be. We also have resources to help you determine if an intern is progressing appropriately, specific to clinical. So if you are a clinical preceptor and you would like to view those, please let us know. It's a timetable that will show you if you have, for example, an 8-week rotation, what should the intern be doing on week 1? How is that different to week 2? And so on with each week. We find, especially for a preceptor who maybe hasn't hosted one of our interns or who maybe has not hosted an intern at all yet, it can be difficult to determine where an intern should be in their first week versus where you are as a practicing dietitian. Because of course we expect their knowledge, their productivity to be very different from what yours is now. But hopefully by the end of their rotation, it is not so different and they're ready to go on and practice. At the midpoint of the rotation, about halfway through, we have a mid-rotation progress report that we ask you to complete and also review with the intern. This is only required for rotations that are greater than 80 hours. I'll review that shortly. But any rotation less than 80 hours, we do not require this to be documented. What we do ask is that if someone is receiving a score of less than a 3, it's on a 1 to 4 scale. And if an intern is receiving 2s or 1s in any of these components, we do ask that you reach out to us so that we understand why they are receiving a 2 or a 1, and so that we can help develop a plan to improve before the end of your rotation and then before they move on to their next rotation. And then throughout the rotation, please check in with your intern. Ensure that they're having a positive educational experience. Check in with any other members at your facility, be it other dietitians on your clinical team, other food service managers that the intern is working with, other WIC nutritionists that the intern has spent days or even just a couple of hours with, to determine if they have anything to say about this intern, if they have feedback that they'd like to share with you, and also if they have completed any of those competencies. We understand that you may not be spending the entire duration of the rotation directly with your intern. And we understand that they may be spending days with other members of your team. But we do ask that you check in with them. And if they felt that they have met one of the competencies, that you discuss that and that you sign off for that as their primary preceptor. We also expect that you'll provide feedback throughout the rotation on their performance, on their professionalism. We ask that you don't just leave this for the halfway point and then the very end, because how can they be expected to improve if they are not given feedback on what areas in which they can improve? With that, we ask that you give them positive feedback, which hopefully is not too much of a problem for you to find some positive feedback so that they know which areas they're excelling in and that they can feel proud of that and then know where to focus their efforts. And as always, communicate with the UNC if any questions arise, if you are concerned about how the intern is progressing, if they are scoring poorly on those progress reports or competencies, or if you have any feedback in general about our program. Lastly, as the rotation is coming to an end, complete the end progress report and the program evaluation. Those are all on the same document as the mid progress report, which I will show you momentarily. Ideally, these would be completed on that very last day of the rotation and reviewed with the intern before they move to their next rotation, or if it's their very last rotation, before they move on to becoming a dietitian themselves. And then for that document, the final rotation CRDN eval and hour tracking document for any competencies and learning activities for which you will be assigning a score. Again, I'll review that in more detail today as well. On that same document is where you'll sign off if they complete staff relief with you, which is required for the internship program. Interns are required to complete 40 hours of food service staff relief and 40 hours of clinical staff relief. And again, all on that same document, the final rotation CRDN eval document is where you will sign your name, verifying that they completed this rotation with you and how many hours that they spent with you. Next, we'll take an in-depth look at these documents, starting with the final rotation CRDN eval and hour tracking. One master document to be edited by every one of the intern's preceptors. By the time you receive this, you may see scores and comments made by the UNC instructor or made by other preceptors. We would like all preceptors to edit one master document. So interns may choose to share this via email, in which case you would download that Word doc, edit it, and then send it back on the last day of the rotation for the intern to then send to their next preceptor. Or the intern may use Google Docs, in which case you can edit it right in the web browser. So keep in mind that we instruct all interns to send a version of this document to you prior to the rotation so that you may review it and understand what is expected of you. With that said, the copy that they are sending you is unlikely to be the most updated copy because they are most likely in another rotation for which preceptors are filling out their portion, and then they won't have the updated copy until they're ready to start your rotation. This is what this document looks like. There is an example here for you to take a peek at, but there are a couple things that I want to mention. So it's separated by domain and by CRDN. Now, when I say CRDN, I'm referring to the core competencies that are meant to be completed in the core rotations. These include the community rotation, the clinical, and the food service rotations. These are provided to us by Ascend, and we do not have any ability to change them. So exactly as you see them here is exactly how they were provided to us, and they should be the same for all internship programs. I'm mentioning this because we do have some competencies that we have created specific for our concentrations. Our concentrations include nutrition, ed, and counseling, management, and ICU. If you have been approached by an intern to fulfill concentration hours, you will only be completing the competencies listed here that correspond with your concentration. If you are an ICU concentration preceptor, you will complete these 3 competencies and you will completely ignore these above. So they will be blank, but you will not be needing to do anything with them. The signing off process is the same for these, which I'll explain momentarily, but I will just point out each of these 3 competencies do have a learning activity attached to it. And those learning activities are all on that same document that the CRDN learning activities are on, which I'll show you soon. So let's go back up to the CRDN section. As I mentioned, here is an example, but I'm going to walk you through an example of how to score. Okay, so let's start here. So this CRDN refers to the code of ethics and professionalism. As you can see listed in green here, there is a learning activity. However, it's not one that preceptors are to score. So the blue learning activities are for preceptors to score, and the green ones, the UNC instructor or director will score. That does not mean that you cannot fulfill the CRDN, right? Because you can fulfill a CRDN without completing the learning activity. So if your intern is with you and they are able to demonstrate proficiency in compliance with federal regulations and rules, you are more than welcome to score the CRDN. In order to do so, you will use that rubric that's provided to determine if they deserve a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. If they are scoring a 2 or below, we need to know about it because they must have a 3 or above in all competencies by the end of the program. That's not to say you're not allowed to score them a 2 or a 1. We just ask that if you do score a 2 or a 1, you let us know as soon as possible so that we can determine a plan and facilitate the best opportunity for learning and completing the program successfully. So let's say I am the preceptor. I think that this intern met this competency. I think that they met expectations as an entry-level practitioner. I think that they still have room to grow. So I'm going to score them a 3. And in order to do so, I'm just going to put my initials here, and that's that. Then when they hand in this copy, we see that the initials BCW, or you could even just put your first and your last initials. That preceptor signed off here. We do ask that you make a note of what activities or rotation experiences were completed in order to fulfill that competency. So I'd want to make a note that the activities here are different from the learning activity. I know that that's confusing because the same word is used twice, and we apologize for that. The word activity is similar in the sense that it's an activity, it's a process that they're doing. But when you see learning activity, that we're really referring to those assignments or projects that have been assigned, for lack of a better term, to the intern. However, let's just say, for example, my intern also, when they were with me, they demonstrated professional writing skills. Again, I think that they met, they didn't exceed, so I'm going to score them a 3 by putting my initials in the 3 column here. So now that I've put my initials in for both of these CRDNs, I need to make a note of what it actually was that they did with me. So that way, when we go back, we can see, okay, they fulfilled this competency in this way, and we can show to the Accreditation Council, yes, they did in fact fulfill this competency, and here is how. So for example, I might say intern wrote an article for our parent newsletter, and then put my initials there. So now this way, when I come through, or I'm sorry, when the director comes through, they can see, okay, they scored a 3 based on this article for the parent newsletter. If I'm curious to know what this newsletter was, I can specifically ask you for it, or the director can ask you for it, but it's helpful for us to see what that was. And then let's say the next preceptor comes through and they see, oh, okay, I also feel that my intern can fulfill these 2 in my rotation. So let's just say my initials are MCM, and I think that they're now coming through and they are really they're showing a 4 in this. They've done the article once before, but now they actually helped me prepare an abstract for my research. So now I'm me as the preceptor, MCM, intern prepared a professional abstract for research pertaining to exercise for type 1 diabetes, or whatever the case may be. And then I'm going to put my initials there. So now at the very end of the program, the director can come through and see, okay, this intern completed this CRDN twice. With BCW, they wrote an article for a parent newsletter. With MCW, they wrote an abstract. So that's wonderful. I'll show you one kind of outlier here. So CRDN 2.4, this, again, all of these CRDNs can be completed in any and all rotations. We specifically pointed this one out to be most likely to be completed in staff relief, especially. We feel that in their first couple of rotations, or in their first weeks with you in the food service or the clinical team, they're kind of absorbing information. They're starting out by shadowing and observing, then they're becoming independent. But we don't feel like they're going to be really an active member of that team until later in the rotation. We don't expect them to step in day 1, be able to speak up in rounds, or have ideas in program improvement meetings, or whatever the case may be. But we do expect that toward the end of that clinical or food service rotation, especially when they're doing staff relief, we do expect that they're going to attend rounds independently. We do expect that they're going to attend meetings with the team of food service managers and directors, and potentially present some ideas of their own. So that's why we pointed out that we wanted this to be especially completed in staff relief. However, if, on day 1, they're taking initiative and they're showing, I'm actually a valued member of this team, then great, go ahead and score it, even if you're not the preceptor completing staff relief. So that was quite a bit of information. I expect that when it comes time to host your intern, you may need to watch this back again, but that's why we're doing this here. So I am going to scroll down and show you a couple of examples of additional outliers. We've got two CRDNs that have learning activities that have 3 parts. So again, these are all going to be listed on that master list of learning activities. We opted not to include the name and the title of the activities on this document because it was already so packed with information. So please refer to that learning activity document for the different parts. But this CRDN is especially interesting. So this is one of the newer CRDNs that Ascend recently in the past couple of years provided to us. So the reason we've separated this out is because we recognize that this CRDN alone can be a beast, right? Because there's so much going on in it. And we want to give interns the opportunity to complete each part of that CRDN, potentially with different preceptors. So you'll notice on the list of learning activities, the parts are separated out by which health screening assessments, in part because we fully expect that one preceptor may not be doing all of the things listed here, but we still want to give you the opportunity to sign off on that CRDN. So for example, part A is performing a blood pressure measurement. So if let's say you're a clinical RD in a hospital, as far as I understand it, most clinical RDs do not perform blood pressure measurements. But you may be recommending pharmacotherapy. You may be recommending antiemetics or stool softeners or CPN. So you may be able to score a different part of this, in which case you can go ahead and score that here. So what I would recommend doing is putting your initials kind of next to where that part is. And if it seems to be getting like jumbled up, you can just go ahead and like put which part you're scoring for. Oops. Like so. And then if another preceptor comes through and says, oh yeah, at our WIC clinic, we test hemoglobin. So that I'm going to include that as point of care testing. So I'm going to go ahead and put my initials in and say that they did part B because they did their point of care testing. So now if I'm a later preceptor and I notice, oh, it looks like part A never got scored. Let me go back and look at what that was. And I see that that's the blood pressure measurement. And then I can choose to, say, okay, I have never done that myself. Nobody here does that. I'm going to move on. I can't do that with them. Or if I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't personally do it as the dietitian in this outpatient clinic, but I do know that the nurses and the nursing techs do when a patient comes in. So I'm going to have them shadow the nursing tech for a morning and then practice blood pressure either on a patient or on the tech or on myself. So then in that case, I'm going to go ahead and send them, for the morning. I discuss with the nurse, did they show proficiency in this? Do you feel comfortable with me signing my name that they've done it? And if that's the case, then I'm going to go ahead and sign my name that they did that. Again, I'll mention this later again too, but even if you're not the one necessarily supervising every one of these activities or CRDNs, it doesn't mean that you aren't the one signing off for it. It just means that you have to collaborate with your team members to determine what the best score is to provide, because we recognize that your intern may not be spending 100% of their time with you as the primary preceptor, and that they may be spending time with other individuals. Okay, so we're going to pretend that the rotation is over. It's time to sign off that they did that rotation. If you are a clinical or food service preceptor and they were able to complete their 40 hours of staff relief with you, you're going to sign that off here. You are also going to sign off that they completed that rotation with you in this section here. You are welcome to ask your intern to fill in this information to save you time. But otherwise, you're going to go ahead and put in your information what the rotation dates were and the number of hours they spent with you. We expect interns to be tracking their hours. So they should be able to let you know what their final hour count was. And then if you wouldn't mind just taking a peek and making sure that that seems right, so that we're not accidentally counting hours that they ended up not spending with you. So just make a note of which rotation that was. You can either do that by highlighting, bolding, underlining, or getting rid of everything else there, just so that it's clear. Now, let's say that we decided that they were going to do community, their full 300 hours of community with me, and they also needed some extra hours toward their nutrition ed concentration. So let's pretend they did that 312 hours with me for community. And then they also did 50 of their 100 concentration hours with me. So what I would do is specify 312 hours of comm or community, and then 50 for nutrition ed. And then you can make a note of that up here too, just so that it's clear. We ask that you don't combine those, although they did technically spend 362 hours with you. If you just include that as community, and then we notice that they're missing nutrition ed hours, that's going to require some investigation on our end. And we may have a delay in completing that intern and graduating them because we're lacking hours in one area. So if you wouldn't mind just taking that extra moment to differentiate, even if they were doing basically the exact same work with you, those nutrition ed competencies are different and the hours are counted differently. So please make sure to separate those out. Here comes a little bit of a tricky part. When it comes to the signature, there are a couple ways that you can do this. The way that has worked best for me is to use the drawing tool in Word, and you can choose blue or black ink, it doesn't matter. And then I just kind of draw my scribble of a signature. Oops, accidentally deleted it. And it's okay if it's messy, my signature is usually messy anyway. So that's one option. The other option, which is a little bit more involved, is to convert this to an Adobe PDF document and to input your digital signature. This does take a couple of extra steps. It's more secure in the sense that adding a digital signature adds security, but it's often more difficult to edit it after the fact. So that's why we don't mind if you just scribble in a signature using your Word feature. So here we are in PDF, and you can sign this doing it a few different ways. What I have done in PDF is I've created like basically another scribble of my signature, but it saves it for me. So I can go into, if you have Adobe PDF, you can go into all tools, fill and sign. I can drag and drop my name. I've also included my credentials, and that's that. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to go to all tools. In my view, I have to go to view more and then use a certificate. So I have already created a digital signature, which requires you to put in a password. So it's secure because it's, assuming only you have your password. So what you have to do is take your mouse and drag the box of where you want that digital signature to go. Input your password. And then you have to save it as a new document. And then there it is, digitally signed. Your intern will then have to convert it to a Word document. So this is what it looks like if you made the decision to take that Word document, convert it to a PDF, digitally sign it, and then convert it back to a Word document, or you send it to our intern who then converts it to a Word document. It does ultimately need to end up back in a Word document so that the next preceptor can more easily edit it. Because when you've got a PDF that's been digitally signed, you can't it doesn't allow you to edit it. So although that, of course, the digital signature is the most secure way to input a signature, we recognize that that is several extra steps, and therefore just using the draw tool to input a signature, we found has been the easiest for most preceptors. This is the list of all the learning activities that we have. We have them divided up by domain and by CRDN. So this is CRDN 1.1, which is listed right here. The name of the project, and then the suggested rotation. This is only a suggested rotation. If you are a community preceptor, or even if you're a concentration preceptor, and you would really like your intern to complete a quality management project with you, you are more than welcome to do this. Follow the instructions that are listed here. If you would like to make an adjustment to the instructions, let us know so that we can approve it before you follow through with the project. Toward the bottom of this document is where the concentration competencies and learning activities are located. So again, if you are a concentration preceptor, you are only completing the competencies and the learning activities associated with that concentration. So if you are the management preceptor, you will complete these 3 activities. Again, let's say you are a manager, but you have nothing to do with budget, and you really cannot fulfill this competency in any capacity, please let us know. These competencies for the concentrations are meant to supplement the competencies for the core rotations, and the activities have been created in a way to best meet the needs of the program and prepare your intern for the RD exam. So we can't have you skipping parts of assignments because they don't meet the needs of your facility. We, of course, don't want you to feel uncomfortable scoring something that you're unfamiliar with, but we just have to know about it so that we can be the ones to review it and score it with the intern, and so that they can be prepared to take that RD exam and practice as an entry-level practitioner. This portion of this recording is meant to walk you through how to complete the progress reports and the program evaluation. There are 2 progress reports required for most rotations. There's a mid-rotation progress report, which is to be completed midway through the rotation. We only require this for rotations that are greater than 80 hours. If you are hosting an intern for 80 hours or fewer, you are welcome to complete this if you would like, but it is not mandatory. We do expect progress reports, informal progress reports, to occur throughout the rotation in the sense that you are checking in with your intern, giving them feedback, but we don't require you to document it unless your rotation is 80 hours or greater. So this is what we are looking for. We've got a 4-point scale of 5 different components of the rotation. So we just ask that you go through and score on a 1 to 4 scale. You can input your score right here, and then input whatever comments you have, and you can do that for each section and put comments if you feel like you need to. After you complete this document, we ask that you sit down with your intern and that you discuss it. This is not just meant to be sent to us as the UNC faculty and staff. It is meant to be discussed with your intern. With that said, if you have something that you don't feel comfortable discussing with your intern for whatever reason, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have a conversation or work together on that. But regardless, all of this should be transparent. They should recognize if they're having trouble with their listening skills or whatever it may be. After each review, you'll input a signature. You can do this by drawing your signature. So that's about what my signature looks like most of the time. And then we ask your intern to sign it as well. And then what they can do is this document can just be saved on your end or on the intern's end. And then when it comes to the last day of the rotation or at some point within the last week for those longer rotations, you can input your scores directly on the same document if you prefer. If you prefer to save this first document and then complete this as a second document, that's okay. As long as we are see clearly that this is the end progress report. We do have a section about attendance that you're welcome to include. Of course, if an intern was tardy or absent, we expect that you'll discuss that with them and discuss expectations for the rotation as it is as a whole. And then we ask that you put your signature, have the intern sign, and then they will submit it, and then it will be signed by the director. So we don't expect you to be the one to ask the director to sign this. That is after it's out of your hands. The third and final page is our program evaluation that we would greatly appreciate you completing if you feel comfortable. If you feel like you don't feel comfortable inputting this with your name attached to it, you're welcome to use this Qualtrics link to put in any feedback that you have anonymously. You can also save this Qualtrics link because if you then later think of something that you wanted to add here, you can just use the Qualtrics link to give us that feedback. You're also more than welcome to email the contacts that you have at UNC, whether it's myself, brianna.williams@unco.edu, or you can send it to dietetic.internship@unco.edu. We appreciate this, any feedback that you have for us. The other thing that I'll mention about scoring is if you are scoring an intern a 2 or a 1, we ask that you reach out to the director to inform them of this and discuss options. We recognize that the mid-rotation progress report, they may need improvement in all of these things. However, especially for this end rotation, if they're still below average, it's important that we know about that as soon as possible so that we can address it. Here are some questions that may have come up for you or may come up in the future. Some of these have been addressed in prior preceptor trainings and some are new, but it should be good review regardless. First question is, what is Canvas and why don't I have access as a preceptor? You may hear an intern refer to Canvas or SharePoint. So Canvas is the learning platform used by UNC. It's where internship documentation is housed. Your intern will download that information and then send you any documents that you will need. It can only be accessed by UNC students and faculty and staff. And then what is SharePoint and why don't I have access to that? This is a separate platform used by UNC that is part of Microsoft. We use this as a way for interns to share documents with us and for UNC interns and faculty and staff to make real-time edits on said documents. We use this as a platform for interns to submit learning activities, progress reports, etc. Because once it's submitted, we can go in and make edits, add signatures, etc. And this portal doesn't close at the end of the semester like Canvas does, since Canvas is attached to course credits. With that said, you will not be accessing SharePoint either because this too is internal. I'm just giving you this explanation so that when you see the words Canvas and SharePoint referenced, you know to what we are referring. Another question we get is, if I'm a primary preceptor, does this mean that I must be directly with the intern for the entire duration of their rotation? Not necessarily. If you work on a team of professionals, interns may work with other members of your team. You may choose to have interns work with other team members if, let's say, you are not available on a given day, or if you feel that an intern would benefit from working with others. Examples could include if you are a food service manager at a long-term care facility, for example, and an intern is completing their LTC rotation with you. You are the primary preceptor, and your primary role may be completing employee reviews, creating the employee schedule, conducting product inventory, stuff like that. You may choose to have the intern spend a day or more with the chef to get hands-on actual experience with food prep. If this is the case, you would then meet with that chef to determine which CRDNs were completed and collaborate on what score from a 1 to 4 that intern deserves on those CRDNs that the chef completed with the intern. You may be, let's say, on a team of clinical dietitians at a hospital. So you, let's say, for example, cover the Gen Med unit and the cardiology unit. Therefore, when the intern spends time with you, they're primarily seeing those types of patients, which is wonderful and a very much a necessary part of an internship to see what comes in on a Gen Med unit and to get exposure to cardiovascular diseases. Well, in order for the intern to obtain the other necessary experiences, such as in oncology or other specialties, that might mean that that intern has to go spend a day or even a week in some cases with the dietitian that specializes in those areas, or the dietitian who covers those units at your hospital. So that's perfectly acceptable and encouraged so that an intern can get a breadth and depth of experiences that are required for any internship accredited through Ascend. Another example might be if you have an intern trying to fulfill one of those newer clinical competencies, which I'll discuss momentarily here. But for example, CRDN 3.5, it requires observation or assistance in placing an NG tube or a nasoenteric tube. So maybe you, as the dietitian on those units, do not place tubes. Therefore, you arrange for the intern to spend some time with nursing or with the dietitian on a unit that frequently has patients needing enteral tubes, whether that dietitian is the one placing the tubes or if it just they'll have more of a chance to be on the unit when a tube is being placed, therefore being able to step into the room and observe it. In any of these scenarios, if you are the primary preceptor, the one who completed the UNC preceptor form, and the one who's listed on the intern schedule, you will be the one completing any and all documentation of those competencies, the CRDNs, the learning activities, the progress reports, and then signing off on how many hours were completed at the very end of the rotation. We just ask that you collaborate with any other professionals that the intern worked with so that you can work together to determine the most appropriate score to provide the competencies that were completed. Some more questions we've received. How do I know which competencies the intern will complete with me? Well, it's really up to you to dictate which competencies you would like to be completed, whether they've already been completed or not. Also, when they begin their rotation, that's when you'll have access to that final rotation CRDN eval and our tracking document. This is that master list that lists all of the competencies and all of the learning activities, and it will show you if preceptors have already initialed to indicate that they have scored that competency. And as a reminder, if it's already initialed, that does not mean that you cannot repeat it in your rotation. But of course, we and the interns appreciate the opportunity to get exposure in the competencies that they have not yet completed, because ultimately they all need to be completed in one way or another by the end of their internship. Another question we received, a lot of the competencies have learning activities attached. Those are those, in other words, assignments or projects. Or homework assignments. You can think of them as, we call them learning activities because they correspond with the CRDNs. They correspond with those competencies. However, not all competencies have learning activities. It will be up to you to determine how that competency should be met. And as a reminder, even competencies that have learning activities, they can be completed in your rotation outside of that learning activity. In many instances, the activity that's assigned is more or less a project to be done at home, or at least partially at home, whether that be they go home and look for evidence-based research to pull together a research project, or they're working on a quality assurance project in which they would be there at the facility to observe the processes, and then they could complete that write-up at home. But there are some competencies that we felt didn't require a learning activity in order to be met. So if there's something that you can do in your rotation, that's fantastic. But the learning activities are kind of meant to be a catch of, in the event that a preceptor didn't feel comfortable scoring a particular competency because they didn't feel like they really had done that in the rotation itself, at least if they did the learning activity, that shows to us, that shows to the accreditation council that they completed the competency in one way or another, and in this case, in the learning activity. And these can be confusing. So if any of these answers to these questions are not actually answering the question for you, that's why we're here, to help guide you through it and give you some more examples and explain it in a different way if required. On a similar topic, can I, as a preceptor, substitute a different project in place of one of those learning activities that UNC has created? So the answer is yes. We do require that you receive approval from us before making any changes. The reason being, these learning activities have been created and they're being delivered in a very specific way for two reasons. One, to meet the competency, and two, to meet the RD exam material. And then, of course, the hope is that it will be a benefit to your facility, whether they are doing a quality assurance project or they're delivering an in-service to your employees or they're creating an educational handout. We hope that this work that they're doing is beneficial to you. But if you feel like tweaking it or changing it altogether would make it more beneficial for your facility, just let us know what you plan to do so that we can ensure that the intern is still getting the education that they require as part of this internship. I'll also remind you that if you have a specific project you were hoping the intern would complete, if it doesn't necessarily match a learning activity specifically, that doesn't mean that you can't assign that in addition to the learning activities. We expect that a lot of what the interns do in their rotation with you is not going to be directly related to those learning activities. They should be related in some capacity to the competencies. However, if you're noticing that, this competency could be met with this other project that we wanted to complete, you're more than welcome to assign that to the intern in addition to their learning activity, because that's just an extra chance for them to practice those skills of researching, of delivering presentations, of completing recipe modifications, whatever the case may be. So on a similar note, I would like to address what to do if you can't fulfill a CRDN or fulfill a concentration competency. So if you are one of the first preceptors in an internship, you can allow a later preceptor to fulfill competencies that you were unable to do. If you are a later preceptor and you are worried you aren't able to fill all of the remaining competencies that haven't yet been done, you are welcome to let us know so we can help facilitate that. In particular, those newer clinical competencies have resulted in some questions. So specifically, if you are a clinical preceptor and cannot fulfill one of those competencies, what should you do? Well, for one, some of these can be completed in rotations outside of clinical. So if you are an inpatient clinical preceptor feeling stressed to fulfill these, there may be an opportunity for interns to complete this elsewhere if they can't with you. Also, as always, if any part of the program is giving you an issue, please let us know and we will help facilitate an experience. Although we cannot change the CRDNs to better meet your rotation because those are provided to us by Ascend, and they've been created very specifically to meet the needs of an entry-level dietitian. So we can't change them, but we can help you determine the best way to meet them. Or if you cannot meet them at all, we can facilitate that with a different preceptor, or they can work with us to complete it. So I'm going to go through each one of those now and give you a few examples. This is CRDN 3.3. It refers to performing health screening and recommending pharmacotherapy. I'll make a few comments on this. First off, if you are watching this, regardless of what rotation you are precepting, if you have the ability to fill all or part of this CRDN, please do so. If interns can observe nursing techs or experienced specialists or anyone complete a manual blood pressure reading, please have them do so. This can be done if you have a sports nutrition rotation with those exercise specialists, or in a rehab center where you have cardiac exercise specialists performing manual blood pressure. Or if you're an outpatient dietitian and you know that a nursing tech goes in before you to complete anthropometrics, get a history, do blood pressure, see if they're doing manual blood pressure, and if so, can the intern enter the room before the dietitian to observe the blood pressure and then practice it once they understand how to do it. We have videos that they can watch at home to better become more comfortable with the process before they do it with a patient. The point is to practice and master the skill themselves. That's ideal. But at the very least, starting with an observation, that's where they should all begin in things like this. If you are a WIC preceptor, if you perform those hemoglobin tests, please have an intern observe and practice this. If you are a community facility that provides glucometers to your community and you have the ability to provide one to the intern, please do so. This is both so that they can physically learn how the test is performed, but also experience a day in the life of an individual with diabetes who is required to prick their finger several times a day. And that way they understand the people who are pricking their fingers, what they go through, or the people who have a continuous glucose monitor, that they understand why that might be recommended because of the cost associated with the finger pricks, the time, and the discomfort. We expect interns to also become familiar with pharmacotherapy. Examples are listed in the CRDN itself, but I also think of parenteral nutrition as pharmacotherapy. Hopefully, interns have exposure to PN in their clinical rotation. So that can count as pharmacotherapy, especially when we're looking at, not only prescribing macronutrients in PN, but micronutrients and insulin. That's an excellent chance for them to recognize how pharmacotherapy is very much nutrition related, in addition to modifying a bowel regimen, insulin, recommending an antiemetic, recommending vitamin or electrolyte repletion. The next CRDN that's relatively new in the past couple of years is 3.4. It's hopefully being done already and partially encompassed in the CRDN above, in the sense that providing education on blood glucose monitoring. So hopefully in CRDN 3.3, they've gotten an opportunity to conduct that blood glucose test, either on themselves or someone else. And then in 3.4, providing education on how to conduct a blood glucose test and how to eat with diabetes and how to take medication with diabetes. I would encourage interns to have at least a general understanding of the different diabetes medications, their mechanism of action, and also when different types of insulins are used and why. And even better, when they might be prescribed, a long-acting versus a short-acting. What does it mean to have different units of insulin, and when are those prescribed? Sometimes it's due to a glucose level being elevated, or it could be due to an insulin to carb ratio of what the patient or client is consuming, be it by mouth, by enteral tube, or through PN. CRDN 3.5 is another one of those new ones that has generated some questions. So to give a brief background on why this CRDN was put into place, many hospitals have RDs place enteral tubes, or at least are advocating to start doing so. Therefore, we need to prepare interns now before they enter the field. However, if you are not in the position to have an intern observe you place a tube, the expectation is that the intern will at least be able to explain the steps involved in the placement. This explanation can be completed with you, or you can let us know if you prefer that we arrange for them to do so with us or with their cohort in order to fulfill this competency. If you could arrange to have them observe or even assist in a tube placement, that would be ideal. We recognize that this may not be feasible, especially in settings in which nurses don't necessarily schedule tube placement. Rather, they often might receive an order, they gather their supplies, and then they perform the placement. It's not necessarily on their schedule per se. So it might be hard for you to schedule an intern to be there for it. But another option might be to arrange for them to spend some time in radiology or endoscopy where they could view an endoscopically placed G-tube. That would be a wonderful experience for them to see really what goes into that when I'm recommending long-term enteral nutrition. And then the last CRDN that I'm going to be discussing in a little bit more detail here is 3.6, referring to swallow screens. As far as I know, most RDNs are not themselves completing a swallow assessment in the sense that they're not the ones providing a sip of liquid, providing a spoonful of pudding, and then observing how a patient responds. However, this CRDN shouldn't necessarily be interpreted that way. A swallow screen can be as simple as asking the questions in a nutrition assessment that should probably occur in all assessments. Are you having trouble chewing or swallowing? Are you coughing after you're swallowing, etc.? And we have a list of swallow screen questions that we provide to interns that they can use. Or if you have a general list that you use, please feel free to provide that to the interns as well. And this is the bare minimum when it comes to conducting a swallow screen. It's just asking those questions of the patient or of the family member, or even of the nurse who has observed the patient eating while they've been in the hospital. Then to take it a step further, it would be fantastic for interns to observe a fees or a barium swallow so that when they are reading an SLP note or talking to a patient about their results of these swallow studies, that they can visualize, better understand what was done, and then be able to better paint the picture of what our nutrition recommendations will be according to that study. We are going to finish off today's training with a few assessment questions. Question 1. What documents are preceptors responsible for completing for each intern? I'll wait a few moments for you to think of the answer. If you need more time, you're welcome to pause the video and think about it. The answer is the final rotation, CRDN eval, and hour tracking document. That's the document with all of the CRDNs listed, the learning activities listed. That's also where you'll sign off on staff relief and where you'll sign off on the number of hours completed in your rotation. And the other internship document is the progress report. There's a mid-rotation progress report for rotations to be completed halfway through, and then the end progress report to be completed at the end. There's also a program evaluation all on that same document that we ask you to take a few minutes to complete, specific to our program. The next question is true or false. If my rotation is fewer than 80 hours, I do not need to check in on how my intern is doing until the very end. This is kind of a trick question, so the answer is false. However, the mid-rotation progress report, the formal progress report that I previously mentioned, that is not required for rotations that are 80 hours or fewer. That formal progress report is only required for rotations greater than 80 hours in length. However, this doesn't mean you shouldn't be checking in with your interns. That should really occur throughout the entire rotation, regardless of the duration of that rotation. Informal check-ins at least weekly, if not daily, if not multiple times a day, are often required and certainly encouraged. The third and final question is true or false. If I am the primary preceptor, I have to be with the intern at all times during the rotation. That answer also is false because the intern may spend time with other members of your team, and the intern may also work independently at times. We do not expect for you to be hovering over your patient for every recipe that they're creating, for every patient that they're going to see, and for every client that they're counseling. We, of course, expect you to be there supervising them, especially toward the beginning of their rotation, but ultimately, we want them to be independent. We want you to be able to hand over a lot of your role to them so that they can ultimately act as a member of your staff and complete 40 hours of staff relief if you are a food service or a clinical preceptor. There may also be times that they are off doing some research on a particular topic. If they're delivering a presentation on type 1 diabetes for children, and they're doing some research on that, and they're creating a presentation to be delivered to your client group, that's something that they might most likely be doing independently. You won't be holding their hand and walking through every step of that process. We do expect that you are available for questions, that you are available to review their work before it's delivered, to review what they learned about a patient before they go see that patient. But we don't expect you to be side by side with them for the entire rotation. The role of the primary preceptor, as I mentioned, is both to supervise and to be there to answer questions and to guide them and to share your wealth of knowledge as a nutrition professional, and also to be the one to sign off on the competencies, the learning activities, to sign your name at the very end of that final rotation packet where it indicates the number of hours the intern completed with you, and also to complete that progress report, review it with the intern, and sign your name on that. Again, if you're working with other members of your team, if the intern is working with other members of your team, we expect that you will collaborate with them to determine the most appropriate score for the competencies and the most appropriate score for the progress reports. And you may even ask them to include a quote or a couple of comments of how they perceived their time with the intern that you can then input into that progress report.